Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'll be going over my usual thoughts on PMQs as Starmer put the focus on Suella Braverman to a certain extent, but mostly immigration. And in reality, I think he may have announced an anti-Brexit policy on the sly. Flynn tackled the core issues with inflation after the latest figures were published, and the Speaker drew no small measure of attention by ejecting a Tory heckler again. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, it was a fiery PMQs today at times. I'm not really sure for entirely the right reasons. The background was that Rishi Sunak had decided not to order an inquiry into Suella Braverman, which I said earlier this week he'd have to do before PMQs, as in he'd have to do something before PMQs, otherwise Starmer would batter him. So Sunak made his announcement shortly before, thus meaning that Starmer would certainly have to go with his plan B. Before I get onto that, the main entertainment seemed to be the Speaker getting tired of repeatedly telling certain noisy members to quiet down, and he decided to start chucking people out. The target of his ejection today was Tory MP Paul Bristow, who's, if you've not heard of him, I don't blame you. He's a nothing backbench MP. He only entered Parliament at the last election. He's made no impression on politics and will be leaving Parliament at the very next election. Now, I am loath to defend a Tory MP here, but I will just, and I do abhor the boorish behaviour in the Commons, but I would say it's up to the Speaker to set the tone. I think there's been an awful lot of rowdiness for a very long time under this Speaker, and he's cajoled people to behave themselves, but he's not really been in the habit of doing it. Now, if the Speaker is clear about what is and isn't acceptable, and MPs decide to test them, and he chucks them out, they only have themselves to blame. But if he suddenly decided to start chucking people out after they've been getting away with the same behaviour for a while, that's not really that consistent. Although I will say, the Speaker did seem to suggest that he'd spoken to Bristow and a few others about repeated transgressions. So it may well be that he has had a private word. He's warned him. He said, look, I'm going to chuck you out if you keep carrying on. He's carried on. And so Hoyle has said, right, I'm establishing some proper boundaries then. In that case, that's fine. But he must be consistent from now on. But anyway, on to the questions. Starmer decided to focus on immigration in order to achieve, I suppose, two objectives. First, use Braverman's unpopularity with the public as a stick to beat Sunak with. Not unreasonable, given that Sunak has just announced his backing for Braverman. He has backed her, presumably in return for her promise that there'll be no repeat of last week's antics. We shall see. But the second objective was to draw a dividing line on immigration policy. Now, I'm not going to go over all the questions one by one because I think this is one of those times where it was all working around a single point. Starmer has basically attacked the policy, a specific policy, of allowing employers to pay 20% below the going rate if they can reasonably claim to be unable to hire UK workers. So it allows them to hire foreign workers and pay them 20% less than should be the case. Now, this was one of the wrinkles that allowed Brexiteers to claim that immigrants were nicking people's jobs. In reality, because we now have a shiny post-Brexit points-based system and we have loads of vacancies going unfilled, it's sort of an argument that wears very thin with me. But you can see how it would be a source of frustration to some people. So they see employers hiring migrant workers and someone says to them, do you know they're paying them 20% less than the going rate? And then you say, this is how they do it. This is how the immigrants nick your jobs, you see, because the employers get to employ them for less than it would cost to employ you. So, of course, a lot of people go, oh, immigrants are nicking jobs. You try telling someone that this is only allowed to be done when that employer cannot get UK workers. They won't believe you. And indeed, they didn't believe people. What Starmer has done is he's attacked this policy. In fact, he specifically said that the reason there are so many job shortages going unfilled now is because of this policy. Now, I think that's a bit of a stretch if I'm going to be completely honest. But the point is he's essentially saying that a Labour government would put a stop to it. Now, let me just indulge in a little bit of lateral thinking here, because lots of people were focusing on Starmer's attacks on the Tories' immigration record, where the numbers about to be published will show that it's rising higher and higher. They'll focus on the fact that Starmer attacked Sunak for issuing 250,000 work visas to foreign workers last year. Indeed, the SNP benches erupted at the line Starmer were taking. They weren't happy about it at all. Because it's Starmer is sort of, it's almost like a bit of dog whistling, isn't it? It's an apparent bashing of immigration levels or immigrant workers. And fair enough, but consider this. So from a Brexit point of view, what is one of the hurdles we need to deal with in order to get the UK on board with wanting to apply to join the EU? Freedom of movement. Absolutely no way around that. There are certain things you could think, well, maybe we need to deal with this, maybe we don't. There are certain things that do need dealing with. Our attitude to freedom of movement is absolutely top of the list. We need freedom. We need mutual freedom of movement to benefit our own economy, inside or outside the EU. But we absolutely, without question, definitely need it in order to rejoin the single market. And whether we want to rejoin the single market outside of the EU membership or inside EU membership, it doesn't matter. We need to get on board with the benefits of freedom of movement. So what is the main objective in the UK? Well, foreign workers come here and take you the jobs for less money. A huge cry from Gammons this was. The fact that it hasn't gone away with Brexit is neither here nor there. You try and tell them, well, we've got Brexit now and it's still happening, isn't it? Yeah, it's still happening. Was it Brexit then? I don't know. Doesn't matter. It's still an objection to freedom of movement. If Labour remove that objection, what then? The arguments against freedom of movement, I'm not saying they'll go away because there was more than this, but they get a lot quieter. Now, I have said before, although Starmer's not going to come out right now and explicitly attack Brexit as he once did, not yet, the time will come. But what he will do in the meantime is quietly dismantle the obstacles towards becoming a proud EU member again. Because quite a lot of his policies, although they're not billed as Brexit policies, such as, say, abolishing the House of Lords, which will inevitably lead to, further electoral reform, it will. These are all things that have a particular objective in mind, but they also work towards getting us fit to join the EU again. And tell me this policy wouldn't help there. Go on, tell me that. But anyway, this was essentially the thrust, really, of all of Starmer's questions. He bashed Braverman now and then. He was attacking her immigration record, and he joked that he didn't understand what it was about Braverman that meant she couldn't deal with points-based systems. A double entendre, primarily attacking the visa system, but also alluding to her wrangling over driving licence points for speeding, of course. But the point Starmer was essentially making when he's being serious was as follows. First, the government are handing out too many work visas to foreign workers. Doesn't matter whether it's true. It's what he was implying as a way of attacking the Tories on an area where they know their own rhetoric doesn't match their actions. They're basically trying to split the Conservatives off from some of their core support. Second, because it doesn't matter to Labour if those voters who are not happy with the Tories go to Reform UK. It's splitting the Tory vote. That's all they want them to do. Second, that we have job shortages caused by employers being able to pay 20% below the market rate for migrant workers. Again, over-egging this one, I think, but, Third, Labour, he's pretty much implying that Labour would prevent the practice, thus taking away a main argument against freedom of movement. Not that he mentioned the last bit. Fourth, that the current government's policies are designed to push British workers into low-paid jobs. Now, this is something I've pointed out a number of times, and this is absolutely true. This is evident. Now, whether this was the right line to take in PMQs is questionable. I instinctively thought to myself, you're not really bashing Sunak as you are sort of, but it's mostly announcing your own policy, which is fine. But wouldn't a policy announcement be better? Wouldn't a speech be better? We've just had the latest economic data out, and although the government are presenting it as progress, there's a lot in the details which show no progress at all, and people are not going to feel progress in their pockets. Starmer had scope here to ask when people's grocery bills would be coming down, knowing full well that they won't be coming down because lowering inflation doesn't do that. But a lot of the public don't realise that. He could have poked at the divisions within the Conservative Party over the latest Partygate furore. Taunt a few Boris Johnson supporters maybe. But he chose to go with immigration in order to effectively set out a Labour policy. We will see. Stephen Flynn of the SNP asked more normal questions, I think. He asked about food inflation. Again, I think this was certainly worth asking about. Although inflation has fallen now, remember, it's still way higher than the average increase in people's income. So it's still people taking real terms pay cuts. But although inflation has fallen now, there's still a problem with core inflation, and food inflation's not going anywhere. That's still like about 20%. Flynn asked if the inflation was linked to greed. Of course it is. It's not public sector workers' wages fueling inflation, is it? It's corporate profits which have been rising many times the rate of inflation. Sunak acknowledged that food inflation was too high, but that the government is providing significant support for the cost of living crisis. No, they're not. What happened is energy bills, for example, went sky high, and the government said, I'll tell you what, we'll give you, the people who need it, a bit of extra money to cover some of that extra cost. So what they're really doing is providing support to allow corporations to maintain high profits. If they'd applied price controls, and there were multiple ways to do that. I mean, the windfall tax and then use that to subsidise was the most obvious way. Then inflation would be lower and people would be less affected by the cost of living. Then Flynn said that the food inflation is nearly at a 45-year high. He asked when the Treasury was going to act. Now, as a little aside, I thought he might have mentioned that gilts are nearly at Liz Truss crashing the economy levels. You know, comparing Sunak's economic record with Liz Truss, I think that was an opportunity that should have been taken, but never mind. It's something I will be discussing when I do a video on the latest economic figures at some point this week, when the Tory skip fire dies down a bit. But anyway, food inflation is also an incredibly important figure, of course, for ordinary voters. And Sunak essentially didn't answer the question. The Treasury has said it will do something. When will that be? When they can be asked? When? I don't know. I don't care. Good answer, Sunak. He then tried to suggest that food inflation throughout Britain was somehow the fault of the SNP's policies in the Scottish Government. You tell me how that works, because I'm buggered if I know. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships, and until next time, I'll see you later.